Hi there, my name is Grace Googe, and here are my 3 best prototypes out of the 7 we created for the Rapid Prototyping module. Theme 1, 1 button. This is the game I made with me and a group of friends, the theme 1 of Rapid Prototyping. It's called Hound at Hell. We brainstormed a bunch of ideas, such as whether or not it'd be a rhythm game, a cooking game, where you time whether to cut the food or not. We also thought about a tennis or pong game, and then we also thought about a dog fetching simulator with a twist so it's a demonic dog. You aim the ball bounces off the walls in this hell dungeon. Now, the objective of this game is the player is basically trapped in this hell dungeon, right? They don't know how they got there. You stumble across a hellhound. Now, this hellhound wants to go to heaven. So he proposes a deal to the player. I will help you get out of this hell dungeon if you become my owner and take me to heaven. Little does the hellhound dog know, the player is in hell for a reason, for committing tax fraud. It's a funny little ending that I made for the concept sketch. A lot of challenges I faced with making the sprites for the tile map and the animation was how time consuming it was, and it was also very difficult to take the sprites from Aseprite to Unity. Unity just wasn't having it, so that was an issue that we faced, but managed to get through that. I also did the animation when you press the start button, and my problem with that was it was my first time drawing, animating in pixel art. It was a case of making sure my brush was the same size, the resolution was correct. I'm not used to drawing dogs. I really struggle to draw a dog. Even my first concept of the hellhound doesn't really look like a dog. I'm more used to drawing cats. I would say I developed my art skills more. I had to go back when I was animating because I'd show it to people and they'd be like, that looks like a cat, and then I'd have to redraw the frames. But yeah, I worked on the concept of the game, the whole story behind it, what would motivate the player to actually want to play it. Because obviously if it's just a regular golf game, it's not really special, it doesn't stand out. So I wanted it to have a unique premise where you would want to keep playing. But as you can see, you basically wait for the arrow to come back on and you aim the ball. I'd say another challenge I faced was the lava of all things. I really struggled to draw it because I don't work in pixel art at all, so it was definitely out of my comfort zone. And it was also the first time using Aseprite. I bought it back in the summer, but I wasn't sure if I was going to use it. One thing I would have liked to have added is audio, but we sadly ran out of time. But if we were to ever continue to develop this prototype, that would definitely be something I would like to work on. I also had to try and figure out a way to remove the background from the animation because it wouldn't export with the transparent background. I had to try green screen, chroma keying the background out in a lot of different software such as After Effects, Premiere Pro, but nothing was working. So in the end I had to use an image and place it behind the animation. So there were a lot of technical difficulties when it came to get the animation to be the way I wanted it to be. Yeah, that's Hound at Hell. Theme 2, Red. For week 2 we were given the theme Red, and I was put into a group with 5 other girls where we decided to create a visual novel game with the main character secretly being guilty of killing their best friend, and the player soon figures this out as the dialogue progresses with the main character in hospital for inflicted wounds to make themselves look innocent. I was tasked with creating the backgrounds for the game, which I stated we should keep the colour palette to monochrome colours only, such as greys, whites and blacks, to make the reds stand out more, especially the red items, to show they infer meaning. As an artist, I've always struggled to create backgrounds for digital art projects, mainly focusing on character design, which is why I decided to block out and create the environments in Maya so that I could then paint over the 3D objects. Paint overs was a technique I learned in the level design module lectures and wanted to try it out for this prototype. For the paint overs, I used Photoshop and picked thin, scratchy and crayon-looking brushes to give the backgrounds that rough and lifeless look to them. Our game was heavily inspired by most popular visual novel games such as Doki Doki Literature Club, Danganronpa, Corpse Party, and most decision-making games. In total, I designed 6 backgrounds for the characters to fit into, such as 2 camera shots in the hospital, 3 camera shots in their dead friend's apartment, and finally a background in a dark alley. I made sure to use the colour red in certain aspects in the background to emphasise certain parts, such as blood on the dead friend's picture frame, showing that their death must have been gory as the splatter is on the picture. But I also wanted to add an X in blood on the dead friend's face in the picture frame to show that the person we're playing as is unstable, and deliberately crossed out their face to signify they're dead in a sick and twisted way. I also had to experiment and rework a lot of my art was characterized, as I had to make sure that the characters that they'd already designed would fit into the frame, as a few times some objects would get in the way of the character's body, such as the bed in the hospital. Especially using Maya, I had to make sure the camera was perfectly in shot for how the characters were facing in the drawings. Sadly, due to a lack of time, we ended up not being able to layer out the backgrounds, whether there be objects in front of the camera or there's a background behind, so we just had to go with the characters kind of ominously floating above like tables or beds, which is definitely something we could have improved upon. I struggled with designing the hospital background, as I definitely spent too much time perfecting the 3D assets, when I could have drawn them in Photoshop during the paint over. This included modelling the curtain and watching tutorials to figure out how to do that, with having to use a polygon plane, then adding in an end cloth, adding restraints to the pole above the curtain, and then using the FX tab to click on the interactive playback icon, and finally scaling the curtain so that it ends up gaining folds. Overall, I definitely feel like I could have created more backgrounds for the game, but as our prototype was 6 minutes long, we were incredibly proud at this achievement, as once again we only had a week to create this. And I felt like we did a really good job fledging out the story, the backgrounds, the characters, and the emphasis of the red being blood and the main character being addicted to this colour. Theme 3? Solve It. For week 3 of the rapid prototyping module, we were given the theme Solve It, where me and my group decided to go with the idea of escaping an Aztec temple by solving 4 puzzles that would open up the other door in the room. We had one puzzle where you matched the mosaic dinosaur tiles, rotated pipes around, pillars that had pressure plates that needed statues placing on to activate part of the door, and finally a button puzzle that could be a rhythm-timed puzzle. Throughout this project, we used Discord and scheduled all our tasks on a website called Task and Plan, so we could write down what we needed to work on. We were inspired by the mobile game Where's My Water, especially for the rotating pipes puzzle, and we also took inspiration from the Aztec culture from the 15th and early 16th century in central Mexico. This was the main inspiration for our art and my UI. I was in charge of creating UI assets, creating the title screen in Unreal Engine 5, and implementing those UI assets into that title screen. For brainstorming and coming up with how I wanted the title screen to look, I experimented with where the game's title text would go on the screen, where the buttons would go, and what parts of the screen would be left to let the player take in the background, as I knew I wanted to do a jungle-themed background with an Aztec temple included. We named our game Temple Escape, as it's practically what you're doing as the player. After creating 4 designs, I liked my first design the best and further developed it in my second sketch. Then with the layout sorted, I started drawing out how the text in the game could look by also looking at existing fonts that were inspired by Aztec art and taking inspiration from them. I relayed my sketches back to the group and they liked the first text font the most. However, I struggled to find where I got the original font from, as I didn't write it down, so I had to result in using Text 6's design. We also made sure to use a earth colour palette, as those colours would fit best with the Aztec theme. My biggest challenge throughout week 3's prototype was creating and building the background in Maya, as I modelled everything that was included in the title screen background. I had to sort out the UV maps so that when the textures would be reapplied to the model from Substance Painter 3D to Maya, it would all then fit correctly. I also had the issue of figuring out how to make the sky look realistic, and so I tried adding in a HDRI environment, but it ended up looking too realistic, so in the end I added a physical sky and tinted the HDRI environment. I also had to look up tutorials for how to create the title screen for the game in Unreal Engine 5. As I'd only made title screens in Unity, it was definitely a lot easier to create in Unreal, but had an issue resizing some of the buttons due to how big I rendered the resolution. But these were all simple fixes. I saved all of my Unreal Engine work to a separate branch in our shared GitHub project, but sadly due to lack of time, we were unable to showcase our game as it was unfinished, but I'm still really happy with how the assets turned out for the UI of the title screen, and I especially enjoyed creating the temple, and we could have definitely used it in the game itself, but due to lack of time, we sadly were unable to. Overall, this has been a great learning experience for me, especially learning how game jams work, how you make quick prototypes within such a short deadline, learning how to manage your time better, especially with making certain assets and not overloading yourself with too much work, especially knowing I can be very ambitious and I tend to want to create more than I physically can do in that time. So it definitely taught me to push myself, but keep myself in check as well. But yeah, these were my 3 prototypes. Thank you for listening.